Welcome to another edition of Everyone Hates Cleveland, the podcast where we actually have news to talk about today. The Cleveland Indians did a slew of things today, biggest of which was trading away Yan Gomes to the Washington Nationals. They tendered Danny Salazar, they tendered Nick Goody, they tendered Neil Ramirez. But of course, the big news is the fact that they traded Yan Gomes to the Nationals for Jefry Rodriguez and Daniel Johnson. Rodriguez, a reliever who debuted this year. And if you really want a fun small sample, check out Jefry Rodriguez's statistics for 2018.
Or don't.
And Daniel Johnson, who is a double-A player right now, center fielder, right fielder, depending on who you listen to and who you've looked at so far. As we jump into this discussion, I want to start, before we jump into the players in the trade, let's start with Yan Gomes for a second. The Indians acquired him in a great move by Chris Antonetti, trading Esmil Rogers.
Man,
who they traded?
What a find he was.
Gomes was obviously a diamond in the rough there, a kind of a multiple use player back then for Toronto. Indians capitalized on him at catcher. It's a win deal for the Indians over his tenure, obviously. Over the past 5 years, I know, Mike, you and I have done this a lot, and I know the three of us have done this as well. We've speculated on the shift at catcher for the Indians for, I think, the past 3 or 4 years. Now we're forced into that, and I don't know, maybe I'll miss that discussion. But your thoughts on Yan Gomes over his tenure and what the Indians at the big league level at catcher are going to do. And I'm going to start with you, Mike, because I think the obvious move is, after trading Gomes, probably makes you internally very happy and probably externally very happy in a second as soon as I shut up.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What the hell? For 2 years, Eric Haase. You finally get the floor after 2 years. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think he has a good role on a big league team. And I'm going to play devil's advocate here. An unlikable person.
Wait.
I feel.
Breaking.
To me, being unlikable is really something I revel in. My wife disagrees with my life choices, but here it is. I think Yan Gomes was really integral. I think he was great. I really hope he plays well in Washington. And I think there are a couple of caveats, but I think the first is, I think we saw a 2018 that doesn't seem super repeatable. He's in his early 30s as a catcher with a lot of wear and tear. He was hot garbage in 2016 and 2017. And I think a lot of how you view this trade comes down to how you view framing numbers and whether you think Roberto Perez can be productive if he's not just playing like once every 12 days. I think there's really good evidence to suggest that Perez is one of the 5 best framers in baseball, and Jeff Mathis keeps getting jobs because people think that's an insanely valuable skill. So I think in that respect, I think there's a really good argument to be made for the fact that like having Perez elevates your pitching staff or really helps it. And so you can put up with the bad offense. And 2, I'm obviously higher on Haase than a lot of people because I'm really high on guys who make adjustments when they're developing, guys who show the cognitive and athletic ability to make an adjustment and say, hey, I want to make it to the big leagues and I know I need to do these things. So, hey, I'm going to go spend the entire offseason working on a HitFX machine, which shows me whether I'm elevating the ball, hitting it well, and like altering my launch angle and fixing my swing so that the contact point is more effective. So I think, to me, I think Haase, he's not a superstar. Do I think he can put up like a couple of years of 95 WRC plus with 20 homers and solid defense? Yeah, I think he could do that. And I think he can do it for really cheap. But I don't care about saving the Dolan's money if we're not spending the $7 million on Gomes this offseason. Like, I don't care about that. So you have to spend the Gomes money for me to say, okay, I understand this. Johnson and Rodriguez aside. And I think Gage has read way more on Rodriguez than I have. So I'll kick it to Gage for Rodriguez, and then Jim should definitely break down Johnson because I've just had a nice IPA for the last hour.
I do want to add something about I've been kind of down on Gomes, and I jumped back on board this past year because it looked like he turned it around a little bit. But I don't think it was as much as about 2019 as escalations in 2020 and 2021 in his contract. Like a get out and take the loss in 2019 on the Gomes front so that you can salvage the potential loss that could happen in 2020 and 2021. It seems like a risk play to me, aside from the obvious caveat that Mike mentioned of saving the Dolan some money. But Jim, do you want to get back and you want to go over what the return was real quick?
Yeah, the return, the Indians got 3 players back in the deal, 2 right now. The 2 players they got was Jefry Rodriguez, who was a starter for much of his minor league career, but moved to the bullpen, at least this year with the Nationals. Started some games for them and ended up in the bullpen. And, you know, a flame-throwing, I think, right-hander. And then Daniel Johnson, a center field prospect for the Nationals with some pop. He was you know, I mean, we can talk about minor league player of the year for an organization. You know, he was the 2017 Nationals minor league player of the year, whatever that means. And of course, and this is my favorite, he's their number 1 power hitting prospect. They must really suck in the minors for power hitting if he's their number 1 guy. Anyway, I'm not saying he doesn't have pop, but holy cow. I mean, so and again, I'll get into him because I've been watching a lot of video over the past hour, but I want to start with probably the guy that's not been talked about a lot, mainly because I think we didn't know about the other guy. It was a weird trade from jump. I forget who Mike, who broke the story today?
Some rando dude from Washington had some rando blogger with 3,000 followers. Yeah. And then it just kind of kept building, but it was 3 hours of just waiting.
Yeah. Well, and after that came out, then we find out that the Mets and the Dodgers were kind of hot and heavy for Gomes, and you kind of got the impression that, you know, the timing was right for this deal. But we didn't, you know, Jefry Rodriguez's name was mentioned right out of the gate, and then he sort of disappeared. I think he was in a Heyman piece, and then that disappeared out of the Heyman piece, and then comes in really within the past hour that he was actually part of the deal. I think Paul Hoynes actually broke that. He was actually in the deal along with a player to be named, one of those infamous player to be named laters, where everybody's probably thinking we're getting another Brantley, but that's for another day to discuss. All right, let's talk about Jefry Rodriguez. Obviously, the Indians need arms in the bullpen, and you know we've talked a lot about having these kind of high upside velocity guys. Gage, seems to me that we got ourselves a high velocity upside guy here.
Yeah, well, I first want to point out the Nationals have never toyed with him in the pen. Maybe until this past year a couple times. He's been starting in the minors his whole career, and he's really interesting to me because I basically think don't look at the 2018 statistics. They're bad. They're brutal. But I think you take this as a flyer for the potential to be that 7th or 8th inning guy, the type that can really help you down the stretch. And as we saw in 2016 in a playoff run, I don't know if he'll have that kind of impact, but his fastball darts, a lot of arm side action, 96 plus. And he's got a really, really solid curveball. It's just a matter of honing in on the command. And I'm guessing that they are hoping that they can play up the fastball and curveball in a pen roll and just bank on trying to find something that clicks for him command-wise. He was a huge prospect in I don't know about huge, but he was a top 10 type guy a couple of years ago in the Nats system, and he faded out. But maybe not top 10, top 20, but seems like he's kind of faded from that view. So I think the Indians just saw something with the fastball.
I think some people still thought he was a top 10 guy just based on the velocity that he had. I think this year, as you mentioned, Gage, the kind of shuffling to the pen as he was struggling, I think confused him. Again, a high upside arm. I love. We'll talk about value in a second, but it seems to be a guy who's going to fit with this team very well. Gage, real quick, before I skip over to Mike what are your thoughts on? I mean, the guy everybody's been talking about is Daniel Johnson, and we've sort of been bantering about. I guess, Mike, I'll go to you with this, just because we've kind of made some similar comments earlier on him. I mean, over the past 4 or 5 months, the Indians have made a lot of really rando moves, bringing in these fringy, like quad A seeming center field guys like Mercado. Now, Johnson. And what are your thoughts just out of the gate on the potential of Daniel Johnson, just as far as fit in this, and maybe down the road? I mean, obviously he's never been higher than Double-A, so he's probably not a guy we see in 2019. But is this just a flyer and a lottery ticket?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a good prospect in that, like, there are multiple tools that look like interesting, especially, I think you'll talk about it, but probably more in a corner. I mean, he has power that's popped in the past. He's not super old. He played all of this season in Double-A at 22 years old, which is a positive thing. He didn't look completely overmatched. He had a 103 WRC plus. Strikeouts weren't that bad. They were decent. Power kind of went away. I mean,
I want to point out he was battling injury from everything that I gathered in the 18.
He had the same injury that Greg Allen had last year, the hamate bone problem. So he missed a legit amount of time, and obviously that sapped away some of his power. I've read a ton of reports, and I hate reading reports on a guy when I've never seen him play, and I watched a ton of video. He seems to profile. He's got an interesting profile because he's got that, depending on where you look, he's got that, 70 speed, and they say he's got a good arm. I've yet to see the arm, so I can't make any comments on that. I've seen some defensive plays of him in right field that are very interesting. He seems to have a good feel for playing right field. I just threw a couple of videos your guys' way earlier today with him robbing, balls in right field. And when you can get 2 or 3 of those in the minors, that does let you know that he does have some skill as far as it's just kind of having a feel for the game in the outfield, especially when you consider the fact that he predominantly plays in center. He's got this weird profile, this tweener profile, where a lot of people say he can't defend in center field as well as he can in right, but he doesn't have the pop in right field to be a right fielder. Therefore, everybody thinks he's a fourth outfielder utility guy, which is fine, I guess, at the end of the day. I guess we can talk about value for Gomes in a second, but I guess my thing is when you're a World Series contender, why are you trading away players and not getting back immediate returns? And Michael Taylor is the guy all three of us speculated on today. Gage, I'll throw it to you first. Was it a big miss not getting a guy like Taylor?
I just don't know if the value is there. We've been speculating about Gomes' value all off season, and Hattery had a great piece on it. I just thought the range of outcomes on his value was pretty large with the $20 million owed after 2019. So I was hoping it'd be Taylor because that's an impact bat in day one. It's just hard to sell me on a guy whose arrival is 2020 at the earliest right now. I know they're trying to shed some salary and kind of keep that vaunted window propped open, but it's just kind of the Indians have a type, don't they? I mean, isn't this the same thing as Zimmer? Like this profile? Will Benson? Like, don't they all fit into the same kind of mold? Like quick, long swings that might be able to pop at some point?
I don't know. It's sort of fascinating, right? Because they have all these stars who Brantley when he popped, Lindor, Ramirez, Diaz are all guys. I mean, Diaz is not a star. Nobody take that out of context, you bastards. And I'm fine with that staying in the podcast. But all those guys run sub 15% K ranges. I do want to go back. I'm piggybacking because I always drive the dialogue in crazy places, but I'm struck by something with Rodriguez, and it's something that sort of sticks out to me that Gage mentioned. But first, I'm going to tie it back to who. So I wrote this story about who we acquired from the Rays, and I don't want to pronounce his entire name because I'll mispronounce it, and I find that to be fundamentally rude. But I wrote this story, and then within 24 hours, I had someone within the organization, and then I had someone who had been a beat writer who was like involved in covering from the Rays, who talked about like how they think he was sort of this like distressed asset because he was caught in between like the organization, player development, and the big league level. And they think he's sort of really going to be unlocked in Cleveland just from a stuff standpoint. There's a ton of upside, and he was caught in between. And I really wonder with Rodriguez, what Gage pointed out, which is this guy was never a reliever at any level. And then he tries it for like 8 or 9 games and definitely struggles with the Nationals this year. But he's someone with really interesting stuff, once a top prospect. And so the question is, like, if you limit his arsenal, if you take him down to 2 pitches, if you're just going fastball, curveball, or fastball slider, like, is this just a guy who's a distressed asset caught in between that you can unlock? I think for an organization that like hasn't put very many interesting bullpen arms or like upside arms in AAA in a long time, like we've been pumping out guys who throw 90 to 93 in AAA for like 10 friggin' years. And it's like, oh, he's got a nice arm angle. That's really exciting. And so now we're seeing them say, hey, let's go buy a guy who throws 97 miles per hour or tops out there with a decent secondary offering and see if we can get the rest to where it needs to be. So I think that to me is one of the more fascinating like subtext of this deal.
So the value of Gomes, because I was ready to jump off a bridge earlier today, but as I listen to you two talk and I think about value. So first of all, Mike, in your piece trading Yan Gomes, you were talking about, 40 great players, 50 great players. And I've seen Johnson graded out at 45, which kind of fits right into the wheelhouse of what you're talking about. Did we, I mean, and again, looking at it just from an organizational standpoint, value versus value. Is this not a win for the Indians? I mean, at the end of the day, you have a catcher in Yan Gomes who for 2 years struggled. He did have an all-star season last year. There's no doubt about it, a resurgence. But at 31, heading into his age 32 year, did we not perhaps, in getting out of the salary, isn't this sort of a win? And we still don't know the player to be named later. I mean, the perfect world is we get maybe a major league guy right now, which is kind of what you were speculating on. We didn't get that, but it does feel like we got perhaps that at least a year from now with a wild card in Rodriguez potentially falling into that role at some point this year as a bullpen arm.
Yeah, I think the big thing I can't get over, we want to talk about his value and see if he can return a major league ready prospect, but this time next year, that guy has no value, even if he replicates this past season. A 32-year-old catcher with $20 million owed over the next 2 years looks a lot worse than a 31-year-old catcher with $7 million owed in the following year and 20 the next 2 after that. So maybe this was just more of a outside of the salary dump implications and insinuations, which I don't really want to get into the merits of those. That's a long road. But maybe this was more of a, we're never going to have this value again in the future. And let's see if we can make something out of it now rather than. So maybe it wasn't about finding a guy who contributes now, but selling that asset before another debilitating or another injury that cuts his 2018 short or anything along those lines. I don't know. I still think it was a risk management play more than anything, which kind of looks sour now when you're competing for the 2019 title. I'll kick it over to Hattery for his input, but
yeah, I mean, I think like one of the interesting things with Gomes was, if they don't pick up his option next year, you have $1 million buyout. So you have $8 million guaranteed to a guy. And I think that there's just like, if you value framing, I think there's a really significant question as to whether the $8 million to play Gomes a ton and play Perez 50 games was really worth it, if there was actually any value add over the top. And I think that's a really legitimate question, I think. And so, but once again, it's just all prefaced on like, are they like bundling that money up? Like we've let Geyer walk and then given up Eric Gonzalez and a really good single A pitching prospect to basically buy a Geyer replacement to save $3 million or $2.5 million. And so, Brantley's walking. We have all these guys walking. And so basically now it's like, they should actually have an operating chunk here. Like, between Gomes and Geyer, you've just cleared another $10 million in expected salary. And Salazar came in $500,000 below his projected ARB cost. It's just like you're setting yourself up. So like if they go sign Marwin Gonzalez, if they go sign an actual starting outfielder, and then they trade Kluber for another, that's a whole nother bag. But like if you get, Kluber move for a starting outfielder, then this is really different. But if the $7 million goes to like 2 relief lotto tickets at like 1 year and $3 million and something else, it's just, I think this is one thing where like, it's really interesting to go, there's like these 2 different process routes you can go, which is like, I think looking at the face of this decision, like we can talk about, and part of my article is like highly flawed that I wrote about Gomes, which is like, we can talk about surplus value and pairing these things up all day, but that doesn't matter when you're trying to win a World Series, because you can always construct trades where you have some sort of surplus value advantage by the way we calculate surplus value, but you're not actually helping yourself win a World Series in the time where you have the highest probability. You're not adding probability at the correct times. And so I think there's legitimate questions as to whether this trade adds the correct probabilities at the correct times, unless this money is expended somewhere else. If it's not, it's probably just a bad deal.
Well, and I guess as we look forward, I guess that at the end of the day, when you're talking about a team that's, while you'd like to consider the Lindor window the window, or the J-Ram window the window, I think reality is setting in that the window right now is directly related to our starting pitching. And as we look forward with the Gomes trade, is this a precursor to a Kluber trade? And that we've heard of deals with them bundled together. Obviously, we know the relationship that the two have. Obviously, the Indians are definitely trying to salary dump. At least that's what it looks like. Is this a precursor to a really busy weekend where we see the Mets, the Dodgers come in and make an offer for Kluber and to see more salary moved? That's part one. Part two of this is, have the Indians, by making this Yan Gomes trade, and this is kind of what I'm fearing the most, have they showcased to Major League Baseball that they are desperate to dump salary, therefore these teams are not going to give us their best offers? Mike, we'll start with you.
It's possible. And I really don't want to have the finances conversation because it's so messy. And part of me just wants to say, look, like there's an extent to which if you never reveal your financials, people are going to be skeptical of your expenses. Like if you're a team that never shows your financials, you just have to take the fact that like when you're contending, people are going to expect you to spend more than $130 million sometimes, especially when it's like, hey, Kluber's probably near the end of his peak or post-peak. Carrasco, Bauer, these are all guys who are like, we're really sliding towards late peak or post-peak. And so it's like, great that we still have this window, but I hate finances. We don't need to talk about it. I don't want to start a big thing. But if you're going to hide your finances forever, I'm not going to do the thing where we just act like they should be capped out at 130 if we can't see them. Because look, they're getting an all-star game as payment to moving away from Chief Wahoo. It's a quid pro quo. They've had multiple playoff games hosted here. And, you don't pay the players in the playoffs, so you take even more net revenue because those are all profit shares. Whatever. It's fine. I don't even know what I think. I didn't respond to your question.
You're unhappy. I don't know
what that be more than this.
Gage, what's the future hold? I mean, are the Indians going to be forced to trade Kluber now? Have they done enough? And can they get a good payoff for Kluber? I know we talked about this in the last podcast, but now we actually have kind of a window into their thinking. I mean, obviously this Gomes deal, as Mike said, cleared away a chunk of money. Are they going to clear away more money? And is the point just to clear away money, or are they trying to clear away money to bring in someone else?
Were they trying to clear away money to give Danny Salazar his $5 million?
Or Carlos Carrasco his extension? That was kind of a...
Yeah. So the Carrasco extension off, I'm upset if they didn't tender Salazar because that's a $4.5 million lottery ticket that could pay huge. But the Carrasco extension kind of just caught me off guard because this guy is also, 31 years old. And You've got him controlled through his age 33 season. Isn't that what you want? Where you want the pitcher controlled through, ideally?
Yep.
I mean, the Indians don't tend to have guys over 31, so extending a 31-year-old who already has 2 more years on his deal is kind of silly to me. But
Okay.
Don't tend to have guys over 31. Did you miss Derek Lowe and?
Well, no. I'm talking about.
I'm just kidding.
No, long-term guys. Yeah, no, they do bring in those 1-year flyer guys, but I digress.
Okay, can I jump in here? So, I don't understand this at all, the Carrasco thing. I know it's an opinion that's unpopular, but the only reason Carrasco would sign his extension is if you guarantee him the next 2 years. And part of the value of those below market options is that they're options. So we're going to take the value asset and then we're going to buy, I'm assuming, later options, right? We're going to buy the 34 and 35 options at a higher price than the 32 and 33-year-old. And we're waiving those advantageous options. I just don't get it. And I love Carrasco. It'd be great if he retired in Cleveland, but it doesn't make any sense to me other than a PR play.
There you go. I mean, that's what it is, right?
Or are they buying an extra year on Carrasco to make up for trading the year that they're trading away of Kluber in 2021?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, I don't know what this is setting up. I'd love to provide insight there. I think the next 4 or 5 days are going to be at least interesting. I do have a couple more questions about potential catchers here, but go ahead, Gage.
I want to point something out because I've seen this, or it's kind of reverberated around Indians folks over the last couple hours after the trade of Gomes. It's not trading Mejia for Brad Hand.
Oh, God.
Has no relationship to Yan Gomes. Don't give me that. Why would you trade Mejia? It's like what Hattery said earlier. It's those probability margin plays to try to increase your chances of winning now. And Mejia didn't have the same value now that Hand did, obviously, in the Indians' front office eyes. I don't think that the Mejia trade has to relate to Yan Gomes at all. Well, I just wanted to throw that out there.
Have we forgotten the fact? I mean, just even take all that out. Have we forgotten the fact that the Indians had zero intention on playing him at catcher? I mean,
zero
chance of him ever playing catcher for the Cleveland Indians. But, trading Mejia and trading Gomes within 4 months of each other ends the world. I mean, that's the most idiotic thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I don't know. I didn't mean to steal any thunder from you, Mike, because I imagine you have something to say. But I just, if you're going to bitch about the Gomes trade because you're getting rid of Gomes, I totally understand that. We're a World Series team getting away the handcuff to freaking Corey Kluber. Get pissed about that. But comparing it to bringing in Brad Hand, who we freaking needed to have any chance, I mean, come on.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be sourced, but at the beginning of this year, I wrote this piece for The Athletic about Francisco Mejia's development at catcher. And thankfully, Zach Mizell helped me get some really good interview quotes from Sandy Alomar and Dave Wallace. And the quotes from Sandy were so striking in how little optimism they had about Francisco Mejia as a long-term catching option. I mean, they were not just the off the record sort of implied stuff, but the literal on the record was fundamentally, he's not there yet, and he's a 22-year-old who's been in the system for 6 years. The fundamental frustration with where he was at as a defensive catcher was real when they dealt him inside the organization. And it wasn't just all the other off-field stuff that everybody always plays up because they heard about that one fight in the dugout 3 effing years ago. We all know about that fight. It was fundamentally, he doesn't play as a catcher. And if he's not hitting for power, he doesn't walk. So that hit tool has to be freaking insane or he has to add power. And that just is not a bet the Indians wanted to make. So they cashed out the asset before it depreciated. It wasn't that complex.
You know what really sucks? I really wanted Grandal I didn't realize he was going to be $16 million a year. And like they're doing everything that you would do if you were trying to get him, but they're not. That really pisses me.
How fun would that be, though? I would love that. It would have been better if they just dealt Gomes to the Dodgers and were like, okay, for another $8 million a year, we're gonna go get Randall, then flip Perez and get Perez off the roster. We're like, all right, we just signed Randall. All right.
I don't know. It was like 2 months ago, and I kind of flipped a text, I think maybe to both of you, maybe just to Mike, just saying, just kind of offhandedly, why don't we go and get Grandal? And they've done it. Like they've done the moves to do it. Now they just, I don't know. But dude's gonna make like $45 million. So much for that. All right, two things. I'd never got a chance. I wanted to come back to you, Mike, about Eric Haase really quickly. We talk about framing with Perez. Talk to everybody about Eric Haase's defensive improvements. We talk a lot about offensively, the types of improvements he's made to make himself, relevant offensively at the major league level. What defensively, what are we talking about here? I mean, obviously he's never really been talked about like a Perez, even a Gomes, but every time I've talked to you, it seems like he has, I don't know if it's substantially improved defensively, but certainly been an able glove behind the plate. Is this a guy that's going to be able to handle this rotation?
Yeah, so like 2017, he was one of the 5 best framers in Double-A. I mean, I don't think he's an elite framer, and maybe not above average, but I think he's an average to maybe a tick above framer, which is great. That's awesome. It's a stable skill. He's a solid thrower, and he's a solid blocker. He's just not on the Perez Gomes tier, but it's just, if you have an average defensive catcher who can steal you a 90 WRC plus, that's a weird thing to reference, but like he can just be competent with the bat. And an average defensive catcher, it's like, oh, you have your starting catcher. That's basically what Gomes actually, Gomes just all over the place. Like he was good last year. The 2 years before that, he couldn't hit it if it wasn't nailed down. And the year before that, he was like one of the 20 best players in baseball. I don't know anything about Yan Gomes. He's unpredictable and old.
So we should have dealt him. I guess that's as good a place as any to end. I mean, I guess going forward, Gage, and I'll kind of let you wrap things up here. What's this offseason going forward look like to you? I mean, are we in a place right now where the Indians are going to capitalize on potential added open salary, or are we really just going to maybe move Kluber, get a piece in replacement of him in that trade, and hope we get into the playoffs and miracles can happen? Because it doesn't feel like last year where we felt like we could tread water till July and then make a big move. I'm not sure that we can do that other than with a guy like Tristan McKenzie, maybe Nolan Jones. What are the Indians' plans? I mean, it seems a lot murkier than it was before 2018.
You still need an outfielder now.
I mean, do we need to say who's in our outfield right now? Can we say who's in our outfield right now? Like Jason Kipnis is our lock.
Yeah, it's gonna be fun watching him throw to home plate from right field or left field.
I don't even know if we should open the store, because is he like? Are we sure Diaz is playing third yet? Are we positive this is happening? Because I'm not. I know everybody else is.
Nope.
I'm not. I mean, I think
gonna be Max Moroff at second base.
All right, I think we can end it there. I think that's
probably going to want to cut all of that out.
I know. I was going to talk.
No, just close it out. Be like, all right, we have nothing else to say. Mike's a jackass.
We're going to wrap things up there. Chances are pretty good we'll probably have something else to talk about in the next 4 or 5 days. Will it be Corey Kluber? Will it be Trevor Bauer? Carrasco?
Actually, I have another topic. Can we talk about this for a second?
Is it about Trevor Bauer?
Is he just like daring the Indians to trade him? Like, is that his entire Twitter persona right now? He's like, I'm going to offend so many people that you have to trade me for like 70 cents on the dollar.
I mean, I don't know. I think maybe he is. I don't know. I mean, don't you think he'd like to play in LA?
Gage, give me a take. Give me a take.
You've got to do it now, because if you keep walking down this road, it could really open up some doors.
He just doesn't know any better. He can't keep a lid on anything. I don't think it's any sublime message or anything to the Indians organization to trade him. I just think he doesn't know how to shut up.
when he says he's better than Kluber and he comes out publicly and says it. And when he says that you shouldn't trade me this year, but you should trade me next year. Like, I think he knows what he's doing. I mean, obviously they're talking to other teams, but I mean, I don't think it hurts with other teams. I think LA would love to have Trevor Bauer because I think LA would look at Trevor Bauer as an asset that if they needed to, they could sign from year to year. I don't know. I kind of like it. I can't help it. I like it. I don't know. I mean,
Can I say I didn't have any problem with his comment about being better than Kluber? He was.
All right.
Yeah.
All right.
I didn't have a problem with it. I just, I don't know. Kluber probably heard it and just went about his day.
You want a major conspiracy theory? I think old Indians core and new Indians core is at odds, and like they're all leaving. Hot take. You know who sits literally in a corner together? 4 lockers are next to each other. We're next to each other last year. Josh Tomlin, Corey Kluber, Michael Brantley, and Yan Gomes. And 3 of those guys are gone. Okay.
Corey's going to be twiddling his thumbs in the corner now.
And Jason Kipnis is just going to be getting thrown out of casinos. I don't know what he's going to be doing. Jim's like, I have to delete this entire podcast.
I'm gonna be like 4 in the freaking morning. Oh man.
But no, seriously, like that whole core is like gone, and it's just happening like this. And we're like, yeah, we don't care. Like only one of those guys is still productive. So see you later.
Well,
so we found the reason for the struggles in 2018.
He's gonna be lonely.
It's not exactly a secret.
Right.
Like, hey, I think Ramirez and Lindor are really different experience for a lot of veterans in that clubhouse. That's all I'm going to say. That's not related to anything or any fights that occurred at all.
So should we talk about this is maybe Tito's last year then?
Well, this might be my last podcast rather than it's Tito's last year.
I'm fairly certain by the end of my editing it'll sound like a completely normal podcast. All right, we're wrapping things up because I don't know where we're going next. 2 podcasts in 2 weeks. Lots of editing by me.
I'm sorry.
No, we're
Oh, my fault.
all right. We'll see you soon. Go Yandy. Peace.
Have a good night, everybody.